The night Duke Alaric Vane threw his wife into the storm, he felt nothing. No guilt, no hesitation, just the cold satisfaction of a man who had finally rid himself of what he called weakness. But 3 days later, when he walked through the empty halls of Blackridge and found her seat at breakfast untouched, something shifted inside him, a crack in the ice he'd built around his chest. By the 7th day, the silence had become unbearable. By the 14th, he understood the truth. He hadn't banished a burden. He'd exiled the only light he ever had. Stay with us until the end to see if redemption is possible for a man who destroyed his own heart. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. The estate of Blackridge Hall sat like a fortress against the northern moors. Gray stone, sharp edges, windows that reflected nothing but cold sky. It wasn't a home. It was a statement, a monument to survival, built by men who'd learned that warmth was a liability and trust a fatal mistake. Duke Alaric Vane had inherited more than land. He'd inherited a legacy of cruelty dressed as strength, passed down from a father who'd taught him that emotion was rot and compassion was surrender. By the time Alaric turned 30, he'd become exactly what the Vane bloodline demanded: untouchable, efficient, and utterly alone. His marriage to Eliza Rowan had been a transaction, nothing more. Her family needed protection. His needed an heir. The ceremony lasted 20 minutes, the wedding night even less. She tried to speak to him once, offering some soft comment about the moonlight through the window, and he'd silenced her with a look that could freeze marrow. "I don't require conversation," he'd said. "I require silence and competence." She'd nodded, said nothing else. And for 3 years, that's exactly what she gave him. Eliza was quiet in the way fog is quiet, present everywhere, touching everything but never demanding attention. She moved through Blackridge like a ghost in a well-tailored gown, managing the household with precision, speaking only when spoken to, existing in the margins of Alaric's carefully controlled world. He barely noticed her. And when he did, it was only to catalog her usefulness, the way she kept the servants in line, the efficiency of her household budgets, the fact that she never embarrassed him in front of guests. She was functional, adequate, invisible. That was exactly how he wanted it. But Eliza wasn't invisible to everyone else. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Garrett, had watched the young Duchess arrive 3 years prior, terrified, alone, married to a man who looked at her like she was a ledger entry. Mrs. Garrett had seen plenty of cold marriages among the nobility, but this one felt different. Alaric didn't just ignore his wife. He seemed to resent her mere existence, as if her presence reminded him of something he'd rather forget. "She deserves better," Mrs. Garrett muttered one evening to the groundskeeper, watching Eliza tend to the rose garden in the fading light. "Most do," the groundskeeper replied, "but better ain't what they get in places like this." The village of Ashford, nestled at the base of the Blackridge estate, knew the Duke only as a landlord, fair in rent, brutal in enforcement, utterly indifferent to anything beyond his ledgers. But they knew the Duchess differently. She came to the village market alone, without fanfare, and actually spoke to people, asked about their children, remembered their names. When the miller's daughter fell ill, Eliza sent medicine. When the blacksmith shop burned, she quietly arranged for materials to rebuild. She never made a show of it, never expected gratitude. She just did it, as if kindness was as natural as breathing. Alaric, of course, knew none of this. He didn't pay attention to what his wife did when she wasn't standing silently beside him at formal dinners. He had an estate to run, investments to manage, a reputation to maintain. Eliza was simply there, a fixture, like the ancient oak in the courtyard or the stone fountain by the entrance, until the night she wasn't. It started with something small, foolish even, a gesture so minor that anyone else would have dismissed it. It was late February, and the northern cold had settled into Blackridge like an unwelcome tenant. Alaric had spent the day riding the estate borders, inspecting fences, confronting a tenant farmer who'd fallen behind on rent. By the time he returned, his mood was blacker than usual, his jaw tight with the particular anger of a man who saw weakness everywhere and despised it. He'd gone to his study, his sanctuary, the one room in Blackridge that was entirely his, and found the fire already lit. Not unusual. The servants knew his routines, but beside his chair, on the small table where he kept his evening whiskey, sat something that shouldn't have been there. A book, Not just any book, a volume of poetry. Romantic drivel about love and longing, the kind of sentimental garbage he'd mocked his entire life. And tucked inside, a note in Eliza's careful handwriting. I noticed you've been reading late into the night. I thought you might enjoy a change from ledgers and legal documents. The firelight makes the words feel warmer. E. For a moment, Alaric just stared at it. Then the rage came. Not the cold, controlled fury he usually wielded like a scalpel. This was something hotter, messier, the kind of anger that comes from being seen when you've spent your entire life making yourself invisible to everyone, including yourself. She'd noticed him, thought about him, tried to… what? Connect? Comfort? Offer companionship? The audacity of it made his hands shake. He found her in the drawing room, working on embroidery by lamplight. She looked up when he entered, and for just a second there was something almost hopeful in her eyes, as if she thought he'd come to thank her. What, he said, his voice low and sharp, is this? He threw the book onto the table in front of her. The note fluttered out, landing face up. Eliza's expression didn't change much, just a small tightening around her eyes, a barely perceptible straightening of her spine. You thought what? That I need you to think for me? That I require your attention? He spat the word like poison. I don't know what delusion you've been entertaining, but let me make something perfectly clear. I don't want your companionship. I don't want your thoughts on what I read or how I spend my evenings. I want you to do your job and stay out of my way. The silence that followed was so complete, Alaric could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Eliza stood slowly. She was trembling. He could see it in her hands, but her voice was steady. I understand, she said quietly. I apologize for the intrusion. Something about her calm made it worse. He wanted her to cry, to argue, to give him an excuse to escalate. Instead, she just stood there, dignified and small, and it made him feel like he was the one shrinking. You don't understand anything, he snapped. You're a duty I fulfill, a name on a contract. Don't mistake that for anything more. She nodded. Of course. I don't need you, he continued, and now the words were coming faster, meaner, like he was trying to convince himself as much as her. I don't need anyone. I survived my father, I survived losing everything twice over, and I did it alone. Whatever softness you think I need, whatever warmth you're trying to peddle, keep it. I don't want it. Still, she said nothing, just watched him with those steady gray eyes that somehow made him feel like she could see straight through to the frightened child he'd buried decades ago. And that look, was what finally broke his control entirely. Get out, he said. Pack your things and leave. Tonight. I don't care where you go, but you're done here. For the first time, genuine shock crossed her face. Alaric, that's Duke Vane to you, and I'm not interested in negotiation. Get out of my house. The storm outside had been building all evening, wind howling across the moors, rain starting to pelt the windows in heavy sheets. It was the kind of weather that made even the stable hands hesitate to venture out, and he was sending her into it. Mrs. Garrett, who'd been passing in the hallway, stopped dead when she heard. She appeared in the doorway, horrified. Your Grace, you can't… It's nearly midnight, and the storm is none of your concern, Alaric cut her off. The Duchess is leaving. See that a carriage is prepared. But where will she go? I don't care. Eliza held up a hand, stopping Mrs. Garrett before she could protest further. It's all right, she said softly. I'll manage. She left the room without another word. Alaric stood there, chest heaving, feeling nothing but a cold, vindictive satisfaction. He'd removed the problem, eliminated the weakness, done what needed to be done. Mrs. Garrett stared at him like he'd just murdered someone. You'll regret this, she said quietly, before the month is out. You'll regret this. Get out, he told her. She did, but not before looking at him with the kind of disgust usually reserved for men who beat animals. 40 minutes later, Alaric watched from his study window as a single carriage rolled down the long drive in the pouring rain. He could just make out Eliza's silhouette through the window, straight-backed, hands folded in her lap, staring ahead. She didn't look back. The carriage disappeared into the storm, and Alaric turned away from the window, pouring himself a whiskey. His hand was steady, his breathing normal. He felt Nothing. Just the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd cut away dead weight. He finished his drink, went to bed, and slept perfectly well. The next morning, he woke to silence. Not the usual morning quiet of a well-run household, servants moving efficiently through their routines, the distant clatter of kitchen work, the soft murmur of voices. This was different. This was the silence of abandonment. He dressed himself, no valet appeared, and went downstairs. The breakfast table was set, but cold. No food, no tea. Just empty plates and the echo of his footsteps in the hall. Mrs. Garrett was in the kitchen, stone-faced. "Where's breakfast?" he demanded. "Cook left this morning," she said flatly. "Took the kitchen girl with her." "What?" "Said she wouldn't work for a man who throws women into storms. Left you this." She handed him a brief note. "I serve families, not tyrants. Find another cook." Alaric crumpled the note. "Fine, hire someone else." "Can't. Word's already spread to the village. No one's willing to come up here." He stared at her. "That's absurd. I pay well above—" "Money don't fix everything, Your Grace. Some lines you don't cross. You crossed one last night." By midday, 3 more servants had quit. By evening, the stables were half empty. 2 grooms gone, taking horses they claimed were owed as back wages. The head gardener left a shovel stuck in the ground by the rose bushes with a note tied to it. "For digging your own grave." Within a week, the only staff remaining were Mrs. Garrett, who stayed out of loyalty to Eliza's memory, not his, an elderly groundskeeper who was too deaf to care about gossip, and a part-time maid who needed the money too desperately to walk away. Blackridge Hall, once run with military precision, began to decay. Dust settled in corners. Meals became haphazard. The rose garden, Eliza's pride, withered from neglect. And the village turned cold. Alaric rode into Ashford 2 weeks after Eliza's departure, expecting the usual deference. Instead, he was met with silent stares. The baker who always nodded respectfully looked right through him. The blacksmith turned his back. When he entered the tavern, conversation stopped dead, and within minutes the place had emptied. The innkeeper, a broad woman named Martha, who'd never feared anything in her life, was the only one who spoke. "You looking for something, Duke?" "Civil behavior, apparently. What's wrong with these people?" Martha wiped down the bar with deliberate slowness. They liked the Duchess, respected her. She was kind when she didn't have to be. You threw her out like trash, and now you're surprised folks don't want to pretend you're decent? My marriage is none of their concern. Maybe not, but cruelty is. And when a man shows what he really is, people remember. Alaric left without another word, but Martha's voice followed him. "She deserved better than you. Everyone knows it now." He tried to ignore it, tried to bury himself in work, in ledgers, in the mechanical routines that had always sustained him. But the silence in Blackridge was different now. It wasn't peaceful. It was accusing. Every empty chair at the dining table, every unlit fireplace, every corner of the garden where Eliza's hands had once worked, they all screamed her absence. And slowly, against every instinct he'd honed over 3 decades, Alaric began to notice what he'd missed. The way the servants had smiled when she walked past. The fresh flowers she'd kept in every room. The small repairs she'd quietly arranged, a loose banister fixed, a drafty window sealed. She'd made Blackridge less like a tomb and more like a place where people could breathe, and he'd called that weakness. 1 month after Eliza left, Alaric stood in the rose garden at twilight, staring at the withered plants. He'd never cared about flowers. They were frivolous, impractical, a waste of resources. But she'd cared. And now they were dying, and for some reason he couldn't name, that felt like a wound. Mrs. Garrett found him there, coat collar turned up against the wind. "You could bring her back," she said quietly. "If you rode fast, if you apologized, I don't know where she is." "Then find her." He turned to look at the old housekeeper. "Why would I do that?" Mrs. Garrett shook her head slowly. "Because you're starting to realize what you lost. I can see it in you. The way you walk through these halls like you're looking for something. You threw away the best thing you ever had, and you didn't even know it until it was gone." Alaric wanted to argue, wanted to dismiss her with the same cold authority he'd always used, but the words wouldn't come, because she was right. He'd spent 30 years building walls, and in one night of cowardice and rage, he'd locked himself inside them permanently. Eliza hadn't been a burden. She'd been a door he was too afraid to walk through, and now that door was gone. "I don't know how to fix this," he said, and the admission felt like breaking bone. "Then learn," Mrs. Garrett replied, "before it's too late." That night, Alaric sat in his study, surrounded by silence so thick it felt like drowning. The book of poetry Eliza had left still sat where he'd thrown it. He picked it up, opened to a random page, and read by firelight. The words meant nothing to him, but he kept reading anyway because her hands had touched these pages, because she'd thought of him, because in 3 years of cold indifference she'd tried, just once, to reach him, and he'd destroyed her for it. The fire burned low, the wind howled outside, and Duke Alaric Vane, who'd survived everything the world had thrown at him, finally understood what it meant to lose. The realization didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, like ice cracking under weight you didn't know was there. 3 weeks after Eliza left, Alaric found himself standing in the hallway outside what had been her sitting room. He hadn't been in there since the night he'd thrown her out, hadn't thought about it. But now, for reasons he couldn't articulate, he pushed open the door. The room was exactly as she'd left it. A half-finished embroidery hoop sat on the side table, needles still threaded. A book lay face down on the windowsill, some novel about seafaring adventures he'd never have guessed she'd read. The curtains she'd chosen, softer than the heavy drapes in the rest of Blackridge, moved slightly in the draft from the poorly sealed window. He picked up the embroidery. It was a garden scene, meticulously detailed. Roses, mostly. The same roses now dying outside because no one remembered to tend them. "She spent hours on that," Mrs. Garrett said from the doorway. He hadn't heard her approach. "Every evening after dinner. Said it helped her think." Alaric set it down carefully, like it might shatter. "I didn't know she did this." "You didn't know a lot of things." Mrs. Garrett's voice wasn't cruel, just factual. Didn't want to know. He couldn't argue with that. 3 years of marriage, and he could count on one hand the conversations they'd had that lasted more than a minute. He knew she took her tea without sugar, that she walked the grounds every morning before breakfast, that she was efficient, quiet, and never complained. But he didn't know she read adventure novels, didn't know she spent evenings creating tiny, perfect worlds with needle and thread, didn't know anything about who she actually was beneath the role he'd forced her into. "Where do you think she went?" he asked. Mrs. Garrett shook her head. "Could be anywhere. She's got family in the South, but they married her off to you in the first place. Don't imagine she'd run back to them. Maybe the coast. She used to talk about the sea sometimes, said she'd never seen it." The coast. Hundreds of miles of shoreline, dozens of port towns. It was like looking for a specific grain of sand on a beach. "I need to find her," Alaric said, and heard how absurd it sounded even as the words left his mouth. "Why? So you can drag her back here and ignore her some more?" He turned to face the housekeeper. "So I can apologize." Mrs. Garrett studied him for a long moment. "Apologizing won't fix what you broke, Your Grace. Some things, once you throw them away, they don't come back." She left him standing there, surrounded by the quiet evidence of a life he'd never bothered to see. The next morning, Alaric rode into Ashford with a purpose. If Eliza had gone anywhere, someone might have seen which direction the carriage headed. Someone might know something. The village was busier than usual. Market day, with farmers bringing in early spring produce and craftsmen selling their wares. But the moment Alaric's horse appeared on the main road, the energy shifted. Conversation stopped. People turned away. A mother pulled her child closer as he passed. He dismounted outside the inn, tied his horse, and walked inside. The common room was half full, but by the time he reached the bar, it was empty except for Martha, who was polishing glasses with the same deliberate slowness she'd used the last time he was here. "Martha." "Duke." "I need information. The night my wife left, did anyone see which direction her carriage went?" Martha set down the glass she was polishing. "And why would you be needing that information now?" "That's my business." "See, that's where you're wrong. You made it everyone's business when you threw her out in a storm. Now you want our help finding her? That's rich." Alaric's jaw tightened. "I'm willing to pay for the information." "I'm sure you are. Money's the only language you speak, isn't it?" Martha leaned forward on the bar. Let me tell you something about your wife, Duke. She came down here once a week, regular as clockwork, bought bread from the baker, vegetables from the farmers, cloth from the weaver, never haggled, never acted like she was too good for us. When old Tom's roof collapsed last winter, she sent workers to fix it, didn't ask for thanks, didn't make a show of it, just did it because it needed doing. I didn't know. Of course you didn't. You were too busy counting your money and feeling superior to notice that your wife was the only decent thing about Blackridge Hall. Martha straightened up. She went east, took the coast road. That's all I know, and that's all you're getting from me. East. The coast road. It was more than he'd had an hour ago. Thank you, he said quietly. Martha snorted. Don't thank me. I didn't do it for you. Did it because maybe if you find her, you can tell her that we haven't forgotten her, that she mattered to people here, even if she didn't matter to you. The words hit harder than any insult she could have thrown, because they were true. Eliza had mattered to these people, had built something real in this village while he'd been locked away in his study, convinced that keeping everyone at arm's length was the same thing as strength. He left the inn and walked through the market, ignoring the stares. Near the baker's stall, he overheard two women talking. Heard he's asking about her now. Bit late for that, isn't it? Guilt, probably. Rich men like that don't feel it often, but when they do, they think throwing money at it will fix everything. She's better off wherever she is. Imagine being married to that cold bastard. They noticed him and fell silent. Alaric kept walking. At the edge of the village, he found old Tom working in his garden, or what passed for a garden, a small patch of earth outside a cottage that looked like it was held together by prayer and stubbornness. Tom? The old man looked up, squinting. Duke Vane, what brings you down here? I heard my wife helped you, last winter. Tom nodded slowly. Aye. Roof came down in a storm. Would have frozen to death if she hadn't sent men to patch it. Wouldn't take a penny for it either. Said she was glad to help. He paused. You didn't know about that, did you? No. Figures. You're not the noticing type? Tom went back to his planting. She was kind, your wife. Real kind. Not the fake sort that rich folk do when they want to look good. The kind that costs something. The kind that sees you as a person, not a problem to solve. Alaric crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with the old man. Where do you think she would have gone? If she wanted to start over somewhere new? Tom considered this. Somewhere she could be useful. Somewhere people needed help. That's who she was, always looking for ways to matter. He jabbed his trowel into the dirt. But you didn't see that, did you? Too busy seeing her as a duty instead of a person. I made a mistake. Mistake's what you call it when you forget to carry a 1 in your ledgers, Duke. What you did was cruelty, and cruelty don't wash off easy. Alaric stood. If you hear anything, if anyone knows where she might be, send word to Blackridge. And why would I do that? Because she deserves better than the uncertainty I left her with, even if that better doesn't include me. Tom looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. I'll keep my ears open. But Duke? Finding her's only half the problem. Becoming someone worthy of her forgiveness, that's the part that'll kill you. Alaric rode back to Blackridge as the sun was setting, old Tom's words circling in his head like crows over carrion. The estate looked different now, not imposing, but lonely. A monument to isolation masquerading as strength. Mrs. Garrett met him at the door. The butcher refused your order, said he won't do business with Blackridge anymore. He can't do that. We have a contract. He burned it. Said some things are worth more than money. You're running out of allies, Your Grace. The village is shutting you out, one business at a time. Alaric pushed past her into the hall. Then I'll find suppliers elsewhere. You're not listening. This isn't about suppliers. This is about consequences. You spent 3 years ignoring everyone and everything except your precious control, and now that control is slipping. The world doesn't stop just because you say so. He wanted to argue, wanted to slam his fist on something and remind everyone who owned this land, who held the power, who made the decisions. But the house was too quiet. The servants were gone. The gardens were dying. And no amount of shouting would change the fact that he'd burned down everything without realizing it was the only thing keeping him warm. That night, alone in his study, Alaric made a decision. He would find Eliza. Not to bring her back. He understood now that she was better off without him, but to apologize. To tell her that she'd been right to leave. To acknowledge that he'd wasted 3 years of her life because he was too much of a coward to admit he needed anyone. It was the first unselfish thing he'd planned to do in 30 years. The next morning, he called for Mrs. Garrett. "I'm leaving for the coast. I'll be gone. I don't know how long. Weeks, probably. Maybe months." She raised an eyebrow. "And who's going to run Blackridge while you're gone?" "You are. You've been doing it anyway since half the staff left. Make decisions as you see fit. Pay yourself whatever you think is fair. I don't care." "You trust me with that kind of authority?" "I trust you more than I trust myself right now." He pulled out a ledger, signed several blank bank drafts. "Use these if you need money for repairs or supplies. Hire new staff if you can find anyone willing to work here. Fix what I broke." Mrs. Garrett took the drafts, studying him carefully. "What do you think will happen when you find her?" "I don't know. Maybe she'll slam the door in my face. Maybe she'll have moved on so completely that she won't even remember me, but I need to try." "And if she doesn't forgive you?" "Then at least I'll know I tried to deserve it." He left Blackridge Hall 3 days later with a single horse, minimal supplies, and no real plan beyond east. The coast road was long and brutal, cutting through moorland that seemed designed to break anyone foolish enough to traverse it. Wind howled across open ground. Rain came in sheets that turned the road to mud. At night, the temperature dropped so low that Alaric had to sleep sitting up next to his fire just to keep from freezing. It was the kind of journey that should have made him turn back, but for the first time in his life, the physical hardship felt like penance. Every cold night, every missed meal, every mile of rough terrain, it was payment for what he'd done to Eliza. And it still wouldn't be enough. He stopped in every town and village along the coast road, asking about a woman traveling alone. Describing Eliza, dark hair, gray eyes, quiet but self-possessed. Most people shook their heads. A few remembered seeing a carriage pass through weeks ago, but couldn't say where it had gone. In a town called Whitby, a stable hand remembered something. "Woman like that stopped here maybe 5 weeks back. Paid me to check her carriage wheels. Didn't talk much, but she was kind. Tipped me extra." "Did she say where she was going?" The stable hand scratched his head. "Not exactly, but she asked about coastal towns where a woman could find work. Teaching, maybe, or helping at schools. I told her about Seabrook. It's about 40 miles north. They got a girls' school there, always looking for governesses." 40 miles north. Alaric was moving the wrong direction. He'd been heading south for 3 weeks. "Thank you," he said, pressing coins into the stable hand's palm. "Hey, mister, I hope you find her. She seemed like she needed a fresh start." "She did," Alaric said quietly. "That's why I threw her away." He turned his horse north and rode hard for 2 days, stopping only when the animal needed rest. The landscape changed as he moved up the coast, rougher, wilder, with cliffs dropping straight into churning sea. The kind of place where people didn't ask too many questions, and fresh starts were common currency. Seabrook was bigger than he expected, a working port town with a girls' school perched on the hill overlooking the harbor. Alaric arrived late in the afternoon, covered in road dust and exhausted. He stabled his horse and made his way to the school. A severe-looking woman in her 50s answered his knock. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone. A woman who may have come here looking for work. Dark hair, gray eyes, excellent education." The woman's expression shifted just slightly. Recognition flickered across her face before she shuddered it. "We don't discuss our staff with strangers." "I'm not a stranger. I'm her husband." "Then you're exactly the kind of stranger we don't discuss our staff with." She started to close the door. Alaric caught it. "Please, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to know if she's safe." The woman looked him up and down with the kind of assessment that suggested she'd dealt with difficult men before and wasn't impressed. "If you're her husband, why doesn't she want you to find her?" "Because I gave her every reason to run and no reason to stay." That apparently was the right answer. The woman's expression softened fractionally. "There's a woman working here who matches that description. Goes by the name Elizabeth Marsh now. She teaches literature and music to the older girls. She's good at it. The students like her." Elizabeth Marsh, not Eliza Vane. She'd shed his name like a coat that didn't fit. "Is she here now?" "She's walking in town. Usually returns by supper." The woman paused. "If you hurt her, If you cause her any distress, I'll have the constable throw you out of Seabrook so fast your head will spin. Is that clear? Perfectly. Good. Then you can wait in the front garden. Don't come inside. Don't approach the students. And if she tells you to leave, you leave. Understood? Alaric nodded. He sat on a bench in the garden for 2 hours watching the sun lower toward the sea. Students passed by occasionally, laughing and chattering, glancing at him with curiosity, but not fear. This was a safe place, a good place, the kind of place where someone could heal, the kind of place Eliza deserved. As the light started to fade, he saw her. She was walking up the hill from town, a basket over one arm, talking to another woman beside her. She was laughing, actually laughing, the sound carrying on the wind, and for a moment Alaric forgot to breathe. He'd never heard her laugh, not once in 3 years. She looked different, not just the laughter, but everything. Her dress was simpler, more practical. Her hair was pulled back in a loose style he'd never seen her wear at Blackridge. But more than that, she looked alive, present, like she'd been holding her breath for 3 years and finally remembered how to exhale. She noticed him as she approached the gate. The laughter died. Her steps slowed. The woman beside her stopped talking, following Eliza's gaze. Is that? Yes, Eliza said quietly. Go inside, Margaret. I'll handle this. Margaret hesitated, clearly ready to intervene, but Eliza gave her a reassuring nod. The other woman squeezed her hand and went inside, though Alaric noticed her watching from the window. Eliza approached slowly, stopping about 10 feet away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. She looked older, he realized. Or maybe not older, just less hidden. At Blackridge, she'd moved like someone trying to take up as little space as possible. Here, she stood straight, shoulders back, meeting his eyes without flinching. How did you find me? Her voice was steady, but he could hear the tension underneath. I asked questions, followed the coast road. A stable hand in Whitby remembered you. And you came all this way because I needed to apologize. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or disbelief. You rode 200 miles to apologize? More like 300. I went south first. He stood up slowly, keeping his distance. I know that doesn't mean anything. I know I don't have the right to even be here. But I needed you to know I was wrong about everything. Eliza set down her basket carefully. What do you want, Alaric? Nothing. I don't want anything from you. Then why are you here? This was the moment, the thing he'd rehearsed 1,000 times in his head during those long, cold nights on the road. But now, standing in front of her, all the carefully prepared words felt hollow. Because you deserved better than what I gave you, he said finally. Because you tried to build something at Blackridge, and I destroyed it. Because I threw you out into a storm, and every day since then I've understood a little more just how cruel that was. You're right, she said simply. It was cruel. And you did destroy everything I tried to build. She crossed her arms. But I'm not the same woman you threw away, Alaric. I don't need your apology to sleep at night. I don't need your validation to know I have worth. I've built a life here, a real life, with people who value me. So if you came all this way hoping for forgiveness, you're going to be disappointed. The words should have hurt, and they did. But there was also something almost freeing about them. She didn't need him, didn't want anything from him. She'd survived. More than that, she'd thrived. I'm not here for forgiveness, Alaric said. I'm here because you should know what happened after you left. The village turned against Blackridge. The servants quit. Everything you'd quietly built, all the goodwill, all the connections, it collapsed the moment you were gone. And I finally understood that you weren't the weakness in that house. You were the only strength it had. Eliza tilted her head slightly. And you thought I needed to know that? I thought you deserved to know that you mattered, that the 3 years you spent there weren't wasted, even though I tried my hardest to make you believe they were. For the first time, her composure cracked just slightly. They were the loneliest 3 years of my life. I know. No, you don't. You have no idea what it's like to live beside someone who looks at you like you're furniture, to try to connect and get nothing back but ice. Her voice was rising now, emotion breaking through. I wasn't asking for love, Alaric. I wasn't even asking for affection. I just wanted to be seen as a person, and you couldn't even give me that." She was right about all of it, and there was nothing he could say that would change what he'd done. "You're right," he said quietly. "And I'm sorry, that's all. Just, I'm sorry." The silence stretched between them. From inside the school, he could hear voices, students settling in for supper, normal life continuing. Finally, Eliza spoke. "What do you want me to say, Alaric? That I forgive you? That we can start over? I can't do that. I won't." "I'm not asking you to." "Then what are you asking?" "Nothing. I'm asking for nothing. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. What you were. What I destroyed. And if I could go back and be different, I would. But I can't. So all I can do is tell you that I'm sorry and that you were right to leave." Eliza's eyes were wet now, though no tears fell. "You don't get to make yourself feel better by unloading this on me. I know. You don't get to ride up here and have some dramatic moment and then go home feeling like you've done the right thing. I know that too. Then why are you here?" "Because you haunt me," Alaric said, and the rawness in his own voice surprised him. "Every room at Black Ridge, every meal I eat alone, every morning I wake up to silence. You're everywhere, and I can't escape the fact that I had something real and I burned it down because I was too much of a coward to let myself need anyone." A tear finally fell, tracking down Eliza's cheek. She wiped it away angrily. "I don't want to be your ghost." "Then what do you want?" "I want you to leave. I want you to go back to your cold house and your cold life and leave me alone. I've built something here, something good, and I won't let you ruin it." It was exactly what he deserved. Alaric nodded slowly. "All right, I'll go." He turned to leave, and her voice stopped him. "Alaric." He looked back. "Did it ever occur to you," she said quietly, "that if you'd just talked to me, if you'd been honest even once about what you were feeling, we might have had something real?" "Every day," he admitted. "Every single day since you left." "Then you're stupider than I thought, because I would have understood. If you'd told me you were scared or damaged or that you didn't know how to let someone in, I would have understood that. But you didn't even try. You just decided I wasn't worth the risk. You were worth everything. I just couldn't see it." Eliza shook her head. "Past tense, that's the problem, isn't it? You see it now that I'm gone, now that it doesn't cost you anything. But when I was there, when I needed you to see it, you were blind." There was nothing he could say to that. She was absolutely right. "I hope you find peace, Alaric," she said finally. "I really do, but you won't find it with me." She picked up her basket and walked into the school without looking back. The door closed with a soft click that felt louder than a slam. Alaric stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed door. Then he walked back down the hill to the stable, collected his horse, and started the long ride back to Black Ridge. The journey back was worse than the journey there. Every mile felt like walking away from the only real thing he'd ever had, but he kept riding because what else was there to do? She didn't want him, didn't need him, and he had no right to ask for anything more. 3 weeks later, he arrived back at Blackridge Hall to find Mrs. Garrett waiting. "Did you find her?" "Yes." "And?" "And she's better off without me. You were right. Some things, once you throw them away, they don't come back." Mrs. Garrett nodded slowly. "What now then?" Alaric looked up at the house, still cold, still lonely, still a monument to everything he'd gotten wrong. "Now," he said, "I figure out how to live with what I've done." The first thing Alaric did when he returned to Blackridge was fire himself. Not literally, though the thought had crossed his mind during the long ride home. But he stripped himself of every comfort, every privilege he'd taken for granted. He moved out of the master bedroom into a small servant's quarter on the 3rd floor. He ate what the remaining staff ate. Simple meals, often cold. He worked the grounds himself, repairing fences, clearing drainage ditches, tasks he'd always delegated to people he never bothered to thank. Mrs. Garrett watched this transformation with the wariness of someone who'd seen men make promises before and break them just as quickly. "What exactly are you doing?" she asked one morning, finding him mucking out the stables. "Penance," Alaric said, not looking up. "That's just guilt with extra steps. Guilt don't fix nothing." "Then what does?" She leaned against the stable door, arms crossed. Actual change. Not this performative suffering you're doing. You think living like a monk makes up for 3 years of cruelty? No, but it's a start. Start of what? Alaric straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. Start of becoming someone who might have deserved her, even if it's too late. Mrs. Garrett softened slightly. She really got under your skin, didn't she? She was always under my skin. I just refused to admit it until she was gone. For 2 months, Alaric worked like a man possessed. He rebuilt relationships with the village, one painful conversation at a time. He apologized to the baker, the blacksmith, the butcher. Most of them didn't accept it. A few threw him out. But he kept trying. He hired new staff at wages higher than standard, with the understanding that he was a difficult employer, trying not to be. He funded repairs to village homes damaged over the winter. He established a trust for old Tom and others like him, elderly villagers who'd fall through the cracks without help. None of it felt like enough. But he did it anyway. The village's hostility began to thaw, degree by grudging degree. Martha at the inn started nodding when he passed. The baker stopped spitting in his direction. It wasn't forgiveness, not even close, but it was less than outright hatred, and Alaric would take what he could get. But Blackridge Hall itself remained a mausoleum. No amount of work could fill the silence in those rooms. Eliza's absence was a presence, haunting every corner. Her sitting room stayed exactly as she'd left it. The rose garden, despite his attempts to revive it, remained stubbornly half dead, as if it knew its true gardener was gone and refused to thrive for anyone else. 3 months after returning from Seabrook, Alaric received an unexpected visitor. He was in the study, the one room he hadn't changed, though he barely used it anymore, when Mrs. Garrett knocked. "There's a man here to see you. Says his name is Robert Marsh." Alaric looked up sharply. "Marsh?" "That's what he said. But should I send him away?" "No, show him in." The man who entered was tall, weathered, probably in his 50s. He had the look of someone who'd spent his life outdoors. Sun-damaged skin, calloused hands, eyes that missed nothing. He assessed Alaric with the same careful scrutiny a hunter might give a predator. "Duke Vane." "Mr. Marsh, I assume you're related to—" "Elizabeth Marsh is my cousin, or that's the name she's using now." Robert sat without being invited, the gesture carrying more authority than rudeness. "You went looking for her." It wasn't a question. Alaric nodded. "She told you to leave her alone." "She did. But you're still thinking about her, still wondering if there's a way to fix what you broke." Alaric met the man's eyes. "There isn't, I know that." "Then why are you still carrying her name around like a wound?" Robert leaned back. "I came here because Elizabeth, she asked me to deliver a message. Or more accurately, she asked me to see if you were worth delivering a message to." "And your verdict?" "Still forming it. Talk to me, Duke. Tell me what you think you learned from all this." It felt like a test. And maybe it was. But Alaric was too tired for games. "I learned that I'm a coward," he said flatly. "I learned that I destroyed something real because I was terrified of what it might cost me. I learned that my wife, my former wife, was stronger and kinder and braver than I ever gave her credit for. And I learned that some mistakes you can't take back no matter how much you want to." Robert studied him in silence. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "That's more self-awareness than most men achieve in a lifetime. Eliza said you were smart, just too stubborn to use it." "She's not wrong." "No, she rarely is." Robert pulled an envelope from his coat. "She wanted me to give you this. But she also wanted me to make sure you understood something first. This isn't an invitation. It's not forgiveness. It's just information. What you do with it is your business, but she doesn't want to hear from you. Is that clear?" "Perfectly." Robert handed over the envelope. "For what it's worth, Duke, I think you're going to torture yourself over this for the rest of your life. And I think that's probably appropriate." He left without another word. Alaric sat alone in the study, staring at the envelope. Eliza's handwriting on the front. Duke Alaric Vane, Blackridge Hall. He opened it. "Alaric, Robert will have made it clear that this isn't an olive branch. I'm writing because I heard from Mrs. Garrett. Yes, we correspond. She was kinder to me than you ever were, that you've been trying to change. I don't know if it's real or if it's just guilt, But either way, you should know a few things. First, I forgave you weeks ago. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to stop carrying anger around. Forgiveness doesn't mean I want you in my life. It just means I refuse to let you occupy space in my head anymore. Second, I'm happy here. Truly happy. I teach girls who actually listen when I speak. I have friends who value my company. I wake up every morning without dread. That's what my life looks like now, and I won't give it up for anything, especially not for a man who only learned to appreciate me after I was gone. Third, there's something you should know about the night you threw me out. I was going to tell you that evening before everything fell apart. I was pregnant. Alaric's hands froze. The letter continued. I lost the baby 2 weeks after I left. The journey, the stress, the cold, it was too much. I don't blame you for that exactly. Bodies fail sometimes. But I do blame you for making sure I had no safe place to grieve, no one to turn to, just me, alone in a rented room, dealing with the loss of something you never knew existed. I'm telling you this not to hurt you, though I suspect it will. I'm telling you because you should understand the full weight of what your cruelty cost. It wasn't just me you threw away that night. It was the possibility of a family, of something bigger than your fear. I don't expect you to respond to this. I don't want you to. But I thought you should know that I tried to build something with you, something real, and you burned it down before it even had a chance to grow. Don't contact me again. Live your life. Fix your mistakes if you can. But do it without me. Elizabeth Marsh. The letter fell from Alaric's hands. He sat there frozen, as the full horror of it crashed over him in waves. A child. She'd been carrying his child, and he'd thrown her out into a storm. She'd lost the baby because of him, because of his cruelty, his cowardice, his pathological need to keep everyone at a distance. The sound that came out of him wasn't quite human. It was grief and rage and self-loathing all compressed into a single, broken noise. He doubled over, hands in his hair, trying to breathe through the weight of it. Mrs. Garrett found him like that an hour later, still sitting in the study, staring at nothing. Your Grace? He handed her the letter without speaking. She read it, her expression hardening with each line. Sweet, merciful. She stopped herself. That poor girl. I killed my own child, Alaric said, his voice hollow. I didn't even know it existed, and I killed it. You didn't know? It doesn't matter, don't you understand? It doesn't matter that I didn't know. The outcome's the same. She was pregnant, and I threw her out, and she lost the baby because of me. Mrs. Garrett set the letter down carefully. What are you going to do? There's nothing to do. She doesn't want to hear from me, doesn't want me in her life. And she's right. I'm poison. Everything I touch turns to... Stop it. Mrs. Garrett's voice cracked like a whip. Stop wallowing and think. You want to honor that child? You want to make something right out of this disaster? Then become the man that child deserved to have as a father. Not for Eliza, not for forgiveness, but because that's the only decent thing left to do. Alaric looked up at her, eyes red. I don't know how. Then figure it out. Because self-pity is a luxury you don't get anymore. She left him alone with the letter and his grief. For 3 days, Alaric barely moved. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, just sat in that study, replaying every moment of that night, the way Eliza had stood there, trembling but dignified. The storm outside. The look on her face when he told her to leave. Had she been about to tell him? Had she opened her mouth to say, I'm pregnant, and he'd cut her off with his cruelty? He'd never know. And that not knowing was its own special torture. On the 4th day, something shifted. Not acceptance, he'd never accept what he'd done, but a grim determination. Mrs. Garrett was right. He couldn't bring back the child, couldn't undo the loss, but he could make sure it meant something. He called for Mrs. Garrett. I need you to help me with something. What? I'm going to establish a trust, a large one. For women in situations like Eliza's, women fleeing difficult marriages, women who need safe places to go, resources to start over, medical care, legal help, whatever they need. Mrs. Garrett blinked. That's actually a good idea. I'll fund it with half my fortune. More, if needed. I want it managed by people who actually care, not lawyers looking to skim off the top. Can you help me find the right people? I can, but Duke, this won't bring her back, won't undo what happened. I know, but maybe it'll help someone else. Maybe some other woman won't have to go through what Eliza did, and maybe that's the best I can do with the wreckage I've made. Over the next month, Alaric worked with the intensity that bordered on obsessive. He sold assets, liquidated investments, poured money into the trust with the kind of single-minded focus he'd once reserved for building his fortune. He hired administrators who'd actually worked with vulnerable women, former midwives, retired teachers, women who understood what was needed. The trust was named the Elizabeth Foundation. He didn't ask Eliza's permission, didn't tell her about it, just built it and set it running, a silent monument to the child he'd never meet and the woman he'd never deserve. The village noticed the change. Hard not to, when half of Blackridge's fortune disappeared into a charitable trust almost overnight. Rumors spread, some kind, most skeptical. "Man's buying his way into heaven," the blacksmith muttered. "We're trying to buy forgiveness," the baker added, but Martha at the inn had a different take. "Maybe he's just trying to make sure his mistake counts for something. World could use more of that, seems to me." 6 months after receiving Eliza's letter, Alaric was in Ashford arranging a meeting with potential trust administrators when he overheard a conversation in the inn. 2 travelers, rough-looking men with the weathered faces of sailors, talking over beer. "Heard the school up in Seabrook's looking for investors. Place barely stays afloat." "What school?" "Girls' school. Teaches them reading, mathematics, practical skills. Good place, from what I hear, but the funding's dried up. Headmistress is trying to keep it running on donations, but it's not enough." Alaric's attention sharpened. Seabrook. That's where Eliza was. "They accepting investments?" he asked, approaching the men. The travelers looked him up and down. "Who's asking?" "Someone with money and an interest in education." One of the men shrugged. "Far as I know, yeah, headmistress, stern woman, forget her name. She's been asking around for patrons, but she's picky, won't take money from just anyone." Alaric nodded slowly. An idea was forming, dangerous, probably stupid, but he couldn't let it go. He made the journey back to Seabrook 3 weeks later, this time prepared. He brought financial documents, letters of reference from the trust administrators, proof that he wasn't just some wealthy man trying to buy influence. The headmistress, the same stern woman who'd warned him off before, received him in her office with obvious reluctance. "Mr. Vane." "Duke, actually, but I prefer just Alaric." "I prefer you not be here at all, but circumstances force compromise. You have 5 minutes. Make your case." He did. Explained the trust. Explained what he was trying to build. Offered to fund the school with no strings attached, no control over curriculum, no say in administration. Just money, regularly distributed, enough to keep the place running and expanding. The headmistress listened in stony silence. When he finished, she leaned back. "Why?" "Because it's a good school doing important work." "That's not why. Try again." Alaric hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Because my wife teaches here, my former wife, and I destroyed her life once. I won't do it again. The school matters to her, which means it matters. That's all." "And if I accept your money, you'll what? Expect access to her? Expect gratitude?" "I expect nothing. I won't even tell her the money's coming from me. Root it through the trust if you want. Make it anonymous. I don't care. I just don't want this place to fail because I can actually do something about it." The headmistress studied him for a long time. "I'm going to be frank, Duke Vane. Elizabeth told me what you did, how you treated her, and my first instinct is to throw you out of this office and tell you to take your guilt money elsewhere." "That's fair. But," she paused, "this school is hanging by a thread. We have 60 girls here who deserve better than watching this place crumble. So I'm going to make you a deal. I'll accept your funding anonymously through the trust on one condition. Name it. You never contact Elizabeth again. You never come back to Seabrook. You fund the school and then you disappear from her life completely. Can you do that?" It was exactly what Eliza had asked for in her letter. Exactly what he should have done months ago. "Yes," Alaric said. "I can do that." "Then we have an agreement." The headmistress stood, extending her hand. "The school thanks you, but Elizabeth will never know. Is that understood?" "Completely." He left Seabrook that afternoon, keeping his promise. Didn't try to see Eliza, didn't linger in town hoping for a glimpse, just arranged the funding, signed the documents, and rode away. But something nagged at him during the journey home. A need to see her one more time, not to talk to her. He'd promised not to, but just to see that she was all right, that she was really as happy as her letter claimed. It was a terrible idea. He knew it was a terrible idea, but the need was overwhelming. He doubled back at night, approaching Seabrook from the coastal road, found a spot on the hillside overlooking the school, hidden among the rocks and scrub brush, and waited. Just before dawn, Eliza emerged from the school building with another teacher. They were laughing about something, carrying baskets toward the beach. Morning gathering, shells or seaweed for a lesson, maybe. Alaric watched from his hiding spot as they walked along the shore, talking and laughing. Eliza looked free. That was the only word for it. She moved differently than she had at Black Ridge. No guardedness, no careful control, just natural, easy movement. She was teaching the other woman something, demonstrating tide pools, pointing out creatures in the rocks. Her whole face lit up when she spoke, animated in a way he'd never seen. This was who she was when no one was crushing her spirit. This was Elizabeth Marsh, not the ghost of Eliza Vane. 2 students joined them, young girls, maybe 14 or 15. Eliza greeted them warmly, immediately pulling them into the lesson. She was patient when they asked questions, encouraging when they made discoveries. She knelt in the sand to show them something, heedless of her skirts getting wet and dirty. She was exactly where she belonged. And watching her there, happy and whole, and so completely removed from anything to do with him, Alaric finally understood what Robert Marsh had meant. Some losses you don't recover from. Some damage you can't repair. The best you can do is make sure you don't cause more. He was about to leave, to honor his promise and disappear, when one of the students pointed up at the hillside, directly at him. Eliza turned, shading her eyes against the rising sun. Even from this distance, he could see the moment she recognized him. Her whole body went rigid. She said something to the other teacher, sharp and quick. The woman gathered the students and hurried them back toward the school. Eliza stood alone on the beach, staring up at him. For a long moment, neither moved. Then she started climbing the hillside toward him, her expression unreadable. Alaric stood slowly, knowing he'd been caught, knowing this was exactly what he'd promised not to do. She reached him breathing hard, face flushed from the climb, and what he suspected was anger. "What are you doing here?" "I was leaving. I swear I was leaving." "That's not an answer. What are you doing here at all? I told you, I specifically told you not to contact me again." "I know. I wasn't going to. I just—" He stopped, realizing how pathetic it sounded. "I needed to see that you were all right." "So you hid on a hillside and spied on me? That's your version of respecting my wishes?" "No. It's my version of being too weak to stay away completely. I'm sorry. It won't happen again." Eliza crossed her arms, the gesture so familiar it hurt. "Did you fund the school?" He froze. "How did you—" "Because the headmistress is terrible at keeping secrets, and because I'm not an idiot. An anonymous donor appears right after you show up asking questions. The timing's not exactly subtle." There was no point lying. "Yes. Through the Elizabeth Foundation. The headmistress agreed not to tell you." "The Elizabeth Foundation?" Her voice was flat. "You named it after me. After our daughter. After what we lost. I wanted—" He stopped, trying to find words that wouldn't sound hollow. "I wanted something good to come from what I destroyed." Eliza's eyes were wet, though no tears fell. "You don't get to do that. You don't get to make me into some kind of memorial to your guilt. That's not what—" "Then what is it? What are you doing, Alaric? Following me, funding my school, building foundations with my name on them? What is this?" "It's all I know how to do." The words came out harsher than he intended. "I can't fix what I broke. Can't bring back our child. Can't undo the 3 years I wasted. So I'm trying to make sure the damage stops here, that's all." "By haunting me? By watching me from hillsides?" "No. By making sure you're safe. That your work continues. That you have what you need to build the life you deserve." He took a breath. I'm leaving now. For real this time. I won't come back. I just needed to see, one more time, that you were all right. Eliza laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're unbelievable. You throw me away, destroy everything, and now you want credit for making sure I'm all right? I'm all right despite you, Alaric, not because of you. I know. Then why are you here? Because I'm selfish, he said simply. Because even knowing you're better off without me, I can't quite let go. But I'm trying. I swear I'm trying. She shook her head. You want absolution. That's what this is. You want me to tell you it's okay, that you're forgiven, that you're a good man trying his best. No. I want you to be happy. And you are. I can see it. So I'll go. He started to walk past her, back toward where he'd left his horse. Her voice stopped him. Wait. He turned. Eliza was trembling slightly, arms still crossed like she was holding herself together. You want to know the worst part? It's not what you did. It's that I still care what happens to you. Even after everything, some stupid part of me worries whether you're eating properly, whether you're taking care of yourself. And I hate that. I hate that you still occupy space in my head. Then let me go, Alaric said quietly. Tell me to disappear, and I will, completely. No more funding, no more checking on you, nothing. Just gone. That's the problem, though, isn't it? If you disappear completely, the school fails. 60 girls lose their education. You've tied your absence to their futures, whether you meant to or not. She was right. He'd trapped her. Not intentionally, but the effect was the same. I'll make arrangements, he said. Set up the funding through independent trustees, people who have no connection to me. The money will keep flowing, but I'll be gone from it. From all of it. You have my word. Eliza studied him in the growing light. Why did you really come back here today? Because I needed to see you thriving without me. Needed to know for certain that you didn't need anything I could give you. And now you know. Yes, now I know. She nodded slowly. Then go. Set up your trustees, make sure the school's secure, and then stay away from me, Alaric. I mean it. No more surprise visits. No more watching from hillsides, just gone. All right. He walked past her, started down the hillside toward the coastal path where he'd left his horse. Behind him, Eliza called out one more time. Alaric! He looked back one final time. She was standing against the sunrise, hair lifting in the sea breeze, and for a moment she looked exactly like she had on their wedding day, young and uncertain and heartbreakingly beautiful. For what it's worth, she said, I think you could have been someone good, if you'd let yourself. I think I was good, he replied. For about 3 seconds. When I married you, everything after that was just me running scared. She didn't respond to that, just stood there as he walked away, disappearing down the hillside until the rocks and brush hid him from view. But when he reached his horse and looked back one last time, she was still standing there on the hillside, watching him go. And he realized with sickening clarity that some part of her, some small, stubborn part, still cared too, which made leaving even harder, and staying impossible. He rode away from Seabrook as the sun broke full over the horizon, knowing he'd never return. The ride back to Blackridge took 4 days, and Alaric used every mile of it to build walls inside himself. Not the old walls, those had been made of ice and arrogance and fear. These were different, built from acceptance. From understanding that some doors, once closed, should stay that way. By the time he reached the estate, he'd made peace with a simple truth. He would spend the rest of his life becoming someone Eliza could have loved, knowing she'd never see it. That was the punishment. That was fair. Mrs. Garrett met him at the door, took one look at his face, and said nothing, just nodded and went to prepare tea. That evening, sitting in the kitchen, he still couldn't stand the formal dining room. Alaric laid out his plan. I'm transferring the school funding to independent trustees, people with no connection to me. Can you help me find them? Mrs. Garrett set down her cup. You saw her. I promised not to. I broke that promise. Won't happen again, but I need to make sure she's protected from my weakness. What happened? She caught me watching her teach, told me to disappear. She's right. And you're just going to do it? Walk away completely? What choice do I have? Every time I try to help, I make things worse. The funding stays, but I'm removing myself from it. That's the only thing left I can do for her. Mrs. Garrett studied him over the rim of her teacup. You're different. Am I? Used to be, you'd have argued. Convinced yourself you knew best. Now you're actually listening. She paused. It's growth, late, but real. Doesn't feel like growth. Feels like amputation. Sometimes those are the same thing. Over the next 3 months, Alaric systematically removed himself from anything connected to Eliza. The school funding was transferred to a board of trustees, retired educators, former headmistresses, people who actually understood what the school needed. The Elizabeth Foundation was restructured with professional administrators who reported to an independent board, not to him. He kept the name. That was his only concession. Let her hate him for it if she wanted, but their daughter deserved to be remembered somewhere in this world, even if only in the ledgers of a charitable trust. With Eliza's ghost finally laid to rest, or as close as it would ever get, Alaric turned his attention to the wasteland he'd made of everything else. Blackridge was still running, but barely. The village still didn't trust him. The estate was profitable but joyless, generating money that sat in accounts gathering interest because he had nothing he wanted to spend it on. He'd become efficient at survival. Now he needed to figure out how to actually live. The first real test came in late autumn, when the Ashford harvest failed. It wasn't a complete disaster. Some crops survived, but it was bad enough that families who'd been scraping by were suddenly facing genuine hunger. The village council met to discuss rationing, emergency measures, ways to stretch supplies through winter. Alaric heard about it from Mrs. Garrett, who'd been invited to the meeting despite not living in the village proper. They're talking about sending families to the workhouse in the next county, she reported, splitting up parents and children because there's not enough food to go around. How much food do they need? A couple tons of grain, some preserved vegetables, dried meat if they can get it, but there's no money for it. The harvest was supposed to carry them through winter, and now I'll cover it. Mrs. Garrett blinked. Just like that? Just like that? Whatever they need. But here's the thing. I'm not going to swoop in like some noble savior. You take this to Martha at the inn. Tell her the funding's available through the foundation if the village wants it. No strings. They don't even have to acknowledge where it came from. You want to do it anonymously? I want them to accept help without feeling like they owe me anything. Can you manage that? Mrs. Garrett smiled slightly. I can manage that. She delivered the offer that evening. The village council, predictably, was suspicious. It's a trap, one of the farmers said. The Duke never did nothing for free in his life. It's not from the Duke, Martha corrected. It's from the Elizabeth Foundation. You know, the one he set up for women fleeing bad marriages? Apparently they've expanded their mission to include emergency relief. Still is money, though, isn't it? Does it matter? Old Tom spoke up from the corner. He'd been quiet through most of the meeting, but now he leaned forward on his cane. My roof got fixed by the Duchess when the Duke didn't even know I existed. Now there's food available to keep families together through winter. Maybe we should stop asking where it comes from and just be grateful it exists. You trust him now? The blacksmith challenged. I trust that a man who used to be complete bastard is trying not to be. That's enough for me. The debate went on for another hour, but in the end, hunger won over pride. The village accepted the food aid. Families stayed together. Children didn't go to the workhouse. And true to his word, Alaric stayed away from all of it. He didn't visit the distribution, didn't check to see if the village was grateful. Just made sure the food arrived and let the foundation administrators handle the rest. 3 weeks later, Martha showed up at Blackridge unannounced. Alaric was in the garden, Eliza's garden, which he'd finally stopped trying to restore and instead had redesigned entirely. New plants, different layout, something that could thrive without her. Duke Vane, he looked up from the soil he'd been turning. Martha, this is unexpected. Yeah, well, I got something to say and I'm not the type to write letters. She crossed her arms. The village wanted me to tell you, officially, from the council, that we appreciate the food aid. It saved lives, kept families together. That matters. I'm glad it helped. We also wanted to say that we're willing to reconsider our position on Blackridge. Alaric set down his spade. Meaning? Meaning we've had a few months to watch you actually try to be decent. The food aid, the foundation, The way you haven't shoved your involvement in our faces. It's not forgiveness, but it's acknowledgement that maybe you're learning." "I am, slowly," Martha nodded. "The baker wants to know if you still need a regular supplier. The blacksmith's willing to take Black Ridge contracts again, and I'm extending an invitation for you to come to the Winter Festival next month. As a guest, not as the Duke throwing his weight around." It was more than he'd expected, more than he deserved, probably. "Tell them yes, to all of it. And Martha, thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank the Duchess. If she'd been half the person you were, we'd have let you starve." She started to leave, then paused. "One more thing. There's talk in the village about building a school. A real one, not just the church lessons. We could use someone with experience funding that kind of thing. The foundation can help. I'll have the administrators reach out." "Good." Martha studied him. "You're still not likable, Duke, but you're starting to be respectable. Keep that up, and we might actually become allies instead of just neighbors." She left, and Alaric stood alone in the garden, feeling something unfamiliar. Not happiness. Not exactly, but maybe something like purpose. The Winter Festival was held in the village square, with bonfires and music and food that people had pooled together to create. Alaric arrived alone, wearing plain clothes instead of his usual formal attire, and immediately felt out of place. But this time, instead of using that discomfort as an excuse to leave, he stayed. Old Tom waved him over to the fire. "Duke, grab a drink. Just Alaric is fine." "Alaric, then. You know how to dance?" "Badly." "Perfect. You'll fit right in." The evening was awkward at first. People didn't quite know how to treat him, not as the feared landlord he'd been, but not as a friend either. But slowly, as the night wore on and the music got louder, the barriers started to drop. The baker's wife asked him about the foundation, genuinely curious about how it worked. The blacksmith told him a joke, a crude one, but still. A group of children roped him into a game that involved running between fires. And he made a complete fool of himself, but nobody seemed to mind. At one point, sitting on a bench catching his breath, Martha joined him. "You're doing better than I expected." Low bar. "True enough." She passed him a flask. "Whiskey. It's terrible, but it's warm." He took a sip. She wasn't wrong. It was awful, but it was also communal, shared, human. He drank it anyway. "I heard from a friend up north," Martha said casually. "Works at a girls' school in Seabrook. Says they just got a massive funding boost. Anonymous donor, but everyone knows it's connected to some foundation down south." Alaric kept his expression neutral. "That's good for them?" "Also heard the Duchess is doing well. Teaching, thriving, all that. Thought you'd want to know." "I appreciate it." Martha looked at him sideways. "You really not going to chase after her again?" "She asked me not to, so no." "And if she changed her mind?" "She won't." "But if she did?" Alaric took another sip of terrible whiskey. "Then I'd tell her I'm glad she's happy, and I'd walk away, because the best thing I can do for her is stay out of her life." Martha whistled low. "You really have changed." "Had to. The alternative was dying alone and bitter, and I've watched enough men do that to know it's not worth it." "What's the plan then? Just live here, run your foundation, be a better landlord?" "That's the plan. It's not glorious, but it's honest." "Could be worse," Martha admitted. "Could be a lot worse." They sat in companionable silence, watching the festival. Alaric realized with some surprise that he was content. Not happy. Happiness felt like a destination he'd forfeited the right to reach. But content. Present. Part of something, even if only at the margins. It was more than he'd had in years. Winter settled over Black Ridge with the usual harshness, but this year it felt different. The house was still too big, too empty, but Alaric had stopped trying to fill it with ghosts. He worked the estate, attended village council meetings when invited, made decisions that benefited his tenants instead of just his ledgers. The foundation grew. What had started as a memorial to his daughter became something larger, a network of safe houses, legal aid, medical care for women escaping bad situations. The administrators sent quarterly reports, and Alaric read every one, looking for ways to expand, improve, reach more people. In late January, he received an unexpected letter. Not from Eliza, he'd stopped hoping for that, but from the headmistress at Seabrook. "Duke Vane, I'm writing to inform you that the school has exceeded all expectations this year. Enrollment is up. We've hired 2 additional teachers. The students are thriving. I'm also writing to tell you that Elizabeth knows the funding came from you. I didn't tell her, she figured it out on her own. But she knows. I thought you should be aware. She hasn't requested that we refuse the money. Hasn't said much about it at all, actually. But I thought transparency was warranted. The school thanks you. The students thank you. And whether Elizabeth thanks you or not, her work is more impactful because of your support. Regards, Headmistress Catherine Wells. Alaric read the letter 3 times, trying to parse what it meant. Eliza knew, and she hadn't stopped the funding. That wasn't forgiveness, he knew better than to think that, but it wasn't rejection either. Maybe it was acceptance. Acceptance that his money could do good, even if he couldn't. He filed the letter away and went back to work. Spring came slowly to Blackridge, but when it arrived, it brought something unexpected, the village school proposal. Martha and the council presented it formally at a community meeting. They wanted to build a proper school building, hire qualified teachers, offer free education to all village children regardless of their family's ability to pay. We're asking for community support, Martha explained. Labor, materials, whatever people can contribute. But we also need funding, real funding, and we were hoping the foundation will cover it, Alaric said before she could finish. Construction costs, teacher salaries, books, and supplies. Whatever you need. The room went quiet. Just like that? One of the farmers asked. Just like that. Though I'd like to make a suggestion, if you're willing. What kind of suggestion? Name it the Rowan School, after my wife's family. They believed in education. It would be fitting. Martha looked at him carefully. Not the Vane School? Or the Elizabeth School? No, the Rowan School. Something that stands on its own, not tied to my guilt or her absence. Just a good school with a good name. The council conferred briefly, then nodded. The Rowan School it is. Construction began in March. Alaric didn't just fund it, he worked on it. Showed up with the village men to lay foundation stones, frame walls, install windows. His hands, soft from years of desk work, blistered and bled. His back ached. But he kept showing up. The blacksmith, working beside him one afternoon, grunted approval. You're terrible at this. I know. But you're consistent. That counts for something. By May, the school was half finished. By July, it was ready for students. The village held a dedication ceremony, and for the first time in his life, Alaric stood in front of people who didn't fear him or resent him, but simply saw him as part of the community. Martha gave the main speech talking about the importance of education, the future they were building for their children. Then she turned to Alaric. We also want to acknowledge Duke Vane, Alaric, for his support of this project. Not just financially, but his actual presence here working alongside us. That matters. There was applause. Not thunderous, not enthusiastic, but genuine. Real. Alaric stood, uncomfortable with the attention. I didn't do this for recognition. I did it because it needed doing. The credit belongs to all of you, the families who will send their children here, the teachers who will shape them, the community that made this happen. I just provided resources. And labor, the blacksmith called out. Don't forget the terrible carpentry. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Good-natured, inclusive. Alaric smiled despite himself. And terrible carpentry, yes. After the ceremony, as people dispersed to celebrate, old Tom approached. You did good here, Alaric. We did good. All of us. Tom nodded. The Duchess would be proud if she knew. She doesn't need to know. This isn't for her. Isn't it, though, even a little bit? Alaric considered that. Maybe once it was. But now it's just because it's right. That's enough. That night, alone at Blackridge, Alaric stood in what had been Eliza's sitting room. He'd kept it unchanged for months, a shrine to his failure. But looking at it now, he realized he didn't need it anymore. He called for Mrs. Garrett the next morning. I want to convert this room, make it a proper study for the foundation work. Somewhere functional, not a memorial. Mrs. Garrett smiled. About time. Pack up her things carefully. The embroidery, the books, everything. Store them somewhere safe. But this room needs to serve a purpose now. What changed? Alaric looked around the space. I finally stopped living in the past. Doesn't mean I've forgotten. Just means I'm not letting it paralyze me anymore. Over the next week, the room was transformed. Eliza's delicate furniture was replaced with sturdy desks. Her embroidery gave way to maps showing where the foundation operated. The soft curtains were swapped for practical blinds. It hurt, letting go of that physical reminder. But it also felt necessary, like he was finally giving her permission to exist somewhere other than his guilt. In August, Mrs. Garrett brought him a letter from Robert Marsh. "Should I be worried?" Alaric asked, opening it. "Read and find out." Duke Vane, "I'm writing on behalf of Elizabeth, though she doesn't know I'm doing this. She'd probably be angry if she did, but some things need to be said. The school in Seabrook is flourishing. Elizabeth is happy. More than that, she's thriving in ways I've never seen. She's found her purpose, her people, her place in the world. But she also asks about you sometimes. Not often, and never directly. But she'll hear news from down south, about the village school, about the foundation's work, and I'll see her pause. Wonder. She won't admit it, but some part of her still cares what happens to you. I'm not telling you this to give you hope. I'm telling you because you should know that your efforts matter. Not just for the people they help, but because they prove you're capable of change. Elizabeth may never forgive you, may never want you in her life. But I think it matters to her that you became someone worthy of forgiveness, even if she can't give it. Keep doing the work. Not for her. For yourself. But know that it's seen. Robert Marsh. Alaric read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it away. It wasn't absolution, it wasn't reconciliation, but it was acknowledgement, and that was more than he'd expected to get. He went back to work. September brought the first graduating class from the Rowan School, only 8 students, but it was a start. The ceremony was small, held in the school's main room, with families packed in to watch their children receive certificates. Alaric sat in the back, trying to be unobtrusive. But the head teacher, a young woman named Sarah, who'd moved to Ashford specifically for this position, called him forward. "Before we conclude, I want to recognize someone who made this possible. Duke Vane provided the funding, yes, but more than that, he showed up. He worked beside us. He listened when we said what we needed. That's partnership, not charity, and it matters." She presented him with a book, a collection of essays written by the students about what education meant to them. The dedication read, "To Alaric Vane, who learned alongside us." He couldn't speak, just nodded his thanks and sat back down, gripping the book like a lifeline. After the ceremony, families approached to thank him. Not with the deference he'd once demanded, but with genuine appreciation. Like he was a person who'd done something good, not a duke who deigned to help. Martha found him as the crowd was dispersing. "You crying, Duke?" "Maybe a little." "Good. Means you're human after all." They walked outside together, watching the village children run around in the fading light. "Think you'll ever stop punishing yourself?" Martha asked. "Probably not, but I'm learning to make the punishment useful. That's something, I suppose." "It's everything," Alaric corrected. "It's the difference between dying bitter and dying having mattered." Martha nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, you matter here now, not because of your title or your money, because of what you've done with both." It was the closest thing to forgiveness he was likely to get from this village. And standing there, watching children who would grow up with opportunities he'd helped create, Alaric realized it was enough. He couldn't change the past, couldn't bring back his daughter, couldn't undo the cruelty he'd inflicted on Eliza, but he could make sure the rest of his life counted for something more than survival. That night, he wrote a letter he had no intention of sending. "Eliza, you'll never read this. I know that. But I need to write it anyway. I've spent the last year becoming someone you might have respected. Not someone you'd love, I forfeited that right, but someone you'd acknowledge as trying. The village has a school now. The foundation is helping hundreds of women. I work with my hands, sit with my community, listen more than I speak. I'm not the man I was, but I'm also not pretending this is redemption. You can't redeem what I did. You can only try to make sure you don't repeat it. I hope you're happy. I hope Seabrook gives you everything Blackridge couldn't. I hope you never think of me except as a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when someone chooses fear over love. But if you do think of me, I hope you know I'm trying. Not for you, not for forgiveness, just because it's the only decent thing left to do. I'll love you until I die, even though I have no right to. That's my burden to carry, not yours, Alaric. He folded the letter, sealed it, and placed it in a drawer with all the other letters he'd never send. Then he went to bed, ready to wake up and do the work again tomorrow. It wasn't the ending he'd wanted, but it was the one he'd earned. And slowly, painfully, he was learning to live with that. 3 years passed like water over stones, slowly wearing away the sharp edges of who Alaric had been, revealing something harder but more honest underneath. The Rowan School expanded twice. The Elizabeth Foundation now operated in 7 counties, helping over 200 women annually. Blackridge Hall became known not as a fortress of isolation, but as the administrative center for charitable work that actually changed lives. And Alaric himself became something he'd never expected. Ordinary. Not in the diminished sense. He was still wealthy, still titled, still commanded a certain respect, but ordinary in the way that mattered. He ate breakfast with the village council, helped repair storm damage alongside farmers, showed up to funerals and weddings without fanfare, just another member of the community doing what neighbors do. The cold disappeared from his eyes. The walls came down. Not all at once, and never completely, but enough that people stopped flinching when he approached. Mrs. Garrett noticed it one morning in early spring, finding him in the kitchen making his own tea. "You look different." "I'm 3 years older. Of course I look different." "That's not what I mean. You look—" She paused, searching for the word. "Settled. Like you're not fighting yourself anymore." Alaric considered that while the kettle boiled. "I suppose I'm not. Can't fight what's already lost." "That's bleak." "No, it's honest. I lost everything that mattered because I was too stupid to know it mattered. Now I'm building something different, not better than what I had. Nothing will ever be better than what I threw away, just different." Mrs. Garrett poured her own tea, studying him. "Do you still think about her?" "Every day, but it's different now. Used to be thinking about her felt like bleeding out. Now it's just remembering. Like she's a person who existed and mattered, not a wound that won't close." "That's growth. That's scar tissue, not the same thing." But it was something, and something was more than he'd had before. The letter arrived on a Thursday in April, delivered by a private courier who refused to say where it had come from. Mrs. Garrett brought it to Alaric while he was working in the garden. The new garden, the one that thrived because it wasn't trying to be something it wasn't. The handwriting on the envelope made his heart stop. Eliza's handwriting, but not the careful, controlled script from her first letter. This was looser, more confident, the writing of someone who'd found their voice. He sat on the garden bench and opened it with hands that only trembled slightly. "Alaric, I'm writing this against my better judgment. Robert told me not to, said you'd built a good life and I should leave it alone, but I've spent 3 years trying not to think about you, and it's not working. So here we are. I've heard about the work you're doing. The schools, the foundation, the way you've changed Ashford from a place that feared you to a place that apparently respects you. I've heard you show up to harvest festivals and help repair flood damage and sit on council meetings like an actual human being. I don't know what to do with this information. Part of me is glad you're finally becoming someone decent. Part of me resents that it took losing everything to get there. And part of me, the part I hate admitting exists, wonders what would have happened if you'd figured this out 3 years earlier. I'm not writing to forgive you. I'm not even sure I can. But I'm writing to acknowledge that you've changed. That matters. Not enough to undo what you did, but enough that I don't want to spend the rest of my life pretending you don't exist. The school here is thriving. We've added classes in science and mathematics. One of my students just won a scholarship to university, the first girl from Seabrook to do so. I'm proud of what we've built. I'm also lonely sometimes. Not for you specifically, just for the idea that someone could see me and choose me and not run away when it got difficult. I thought I'd found that with you. I was wrong. But I'm starting to think maybe I wasn't wrong to want it. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Maybe because you're the only person who knows the whole story. Maybe because 3 years is long enough to carry anger without it becoming poison. I'm not asking for anything. I don't want you to respond. I just wanted you to know that I see what you're doing. And I think the woman you married would have been proud of the man you're becoming. But I'm not that woman anymore. And you're not the man who destroyed her. So we're both different people now, carrying the weight of what the old versions did to each other. I hope that's enough for you. It has to be enough for me. Elizabeth Alaric read the letter 4 times. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his pocket, right over his heart. She saw him. After 3 years of silence, she saw what he'd become. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation, but it was acknowledgement, and that was more than he'd dared hope for. He didn't respond. She'd asked him not to, and he'd learned, finally, painfully, to respect her boundaries. But he kept the letter, and on the hardest days, when the weight of his choices felt too heavy to carry, he'd read it again and remember that change was possible, even if redemption wasn't. 2 months later, disaster struck Ashford. The spring rains that year were relentless. Rivers swelled beyond their banks, fields flooded, and the bridge connecting Ashford to the main road, the bridge that had stood for 50 years, collapsed in the middle of the night, taking a wagon and its driver with it. The driver survived, barely, but the bridge was gone, and with it, Ashford's connection to the outside world. Trade stopped. Medical supplies couldn't get in. The village was cut off. The council met in emergency session at the inn. We need a new bridge, Martha stated the obvious, but that takes months to build and money we don't have. How much money? Alaric asked. More than the village can raise. We're talking foundation work, stone supports, proper engineering, 10,000 pounds at least. Maybe 15. The room went quiet. That kind of money was beyond their reach. The foundation can cover it, Alaric said. That's not what the foundation is for, one of the counselors objected. It's for helping women, not infrastructure. It's for helping people. This helps people. Alaric turned to Martha. How fast can we move if money's not an issue? If we hire crews from the next county over, bring in materials by the North Road, maybe 6 weeks, 2 months? Do it. I'll authorize the funds today. But the blacksmith shook his head. 6 weeks is too long. We got sick people who need medicine now. Got farmers who need to sell crops before they rot. We can't wait 2 months. Then what do you suggest? The blacksmith looked at Alaric levelly. There's an old ford 3 miles upriver, not used in decades because it's dangerous. Rocks, fast current, easy to lose a wagon. But it's crossable if you know what you're doing. We could use that for light traffic while the bridge is being built. How dangerous? Lost 2 men to that ford back in my grandfather's time. It's not a joke. Alaric stood. Show me. They rode out that afternoon. Alaric, the blacksmith, Martha, and half the council. The ford was exactly as described, a churning stretch of river where the water ran fast over submerged rocks, with unclear footing and no clear path across. This is suicide for wagons, Martha said flatly. Not if we mark the safe path, the blacksmith argued. Drive posts, string ropes for guides. Make it so people know where to cross. And who's going to test that path? Who's going to risk their neck to figure out which road is safe? I will, Alaric said. Everyone turned to stare at him. You? The blacksmith said. No offense, Duke, but you're not exactly known for your outdoor skills. Then it's time I learned. You said it yourself. We need this ford operational. Someone has to test the routes. It might as well be me. Martha stepped forward. Alaric, this is insane. You could die out there. And if I don't try, other people will. People who actually matter to this village. I'm expendable. Let me be useful. You're not expendable, Old Tom said quietly. He'd ridden up with the group, though he'd stayed silent until now. Not anymore. You've become part of this place. We can't afford to lose you. The words hit harder than Alaric expected. Then I'll be careful, but this needs doing, and I'm doing it. They spent the rest of the day arguing, but Alaric wouldn't budge. Finally, reluctantly, the council agreed to let him make the attempt. With conditions. Ropes tied to shore, the blacksmith and 2 farmers standing ready to pull him out if things went wrong, and only in daylight when they could see what they were doing. The first attempt nearly killed him. He made it halfway across on horseback before the current caught them. The horse panicked, reared, and Alaric went into the water hard. The cold was shocking, spring runoff, barely above freezing. He went under, came up gasping, got dragged downstream until the rope caught, and the men on shore hauled him back like a fish. He lay on the bank coughing up river water while Martha stood over him. You done being stupid? Not even close, he gasped. That route's no good. But there's another path. Saw it while I was drowning. More to the north. You're not going back in there? Yes, I am. Just need different approach. No horse this time. I'll wait it, test the depth with a pole. Alaric. Martha, people are going to use this ford whether we mark it or not. Better that I find the safe route now than wait for someone else to drown trying. She looked like she wanted to argue more, but couldn't find the words. You've changed. You know that? The old you would never have risked yourself for the village. The old me is why I have to do this now. He went back in 6 more times over the next 3 days. Each attempt taught him something, where the rocks were stable, where the current ran strongest, which angles worked and which didn't. He got battered, bruised, half-drowned twice more. But slowly, painfully, he mapped out a route that worked. On the 4th day, he made it across successfully, marking the path with posts driven into the riverbed. The village watched from both banks, and when he climbed out on the far side, soaked, bleeding from a gash on his arm, but alive, they cheered. He'd done it, found a way through the impossible, proved that determination and stubbornness could overcome even his own incompetence. But more than that, he'd done it for them. Not for redemption, not for forgiveness, just because it needed doing and he was able to do it. The blacksmith met him on the far bank, clapping him on the shoulder hard enough to hurt. You crazy bastard, you actually did it. Don't sound so surprised. Can't help it. You keep acting like you care about people. It's unsettling. They rigged guide ropes along the path Alaric had found, creating a system that let wagons and riders cross safely as long as they followed the markers. It wasn't perfect. 2 wagons still got stuck in the first week, requiring rescue, but it was functional. The village had access again, and while the temporary ford operated, crews worked on the new bridge. Alaric funded it, but he also worked on it, showing up every morning to haul stones, mix mortar, do whatever tasks they'd let him do. His hands, which had softened slightly over the past 3 years, hardened again. His back ached constantly. But he kept showing up. The bridge took 7 weeks to complete. When it opened, the village held a celebration that lasted 2 days. On the second evening, as things were winding down, Martha pulled Alaric aside. The council voted. We want to name the bridge after you. No. Figured you'd say that, so we're naming it after the Duchess instead. The Eliza Bridge. You got a problem with that? Alaric felt his throat tighten. None at all. Good. Because she's the reason you changed. And this bridge, this whole village really, we're all benefiting from that change. Seems right to acknowledge where it started. The Eliza Bridge. A permanent reminder that some good things could come from terrible choices, even if the person who made those choices never got to enjoy them. A week after the bridge dedication, Alaric received another letter, this time from Headmistress Wells in Seabrook. Duke Vane, I'm writing to inform you that Elizabeth Marsh has resigned from her position at the school, effective immediately. Before you panic, she's fine. She simply decided to pursue a different path. She's opening her own school. A smaller one focused specifically on girls from difficult family situations. Girls who need not just education, but refuge. She's calling it the Rowan House School. I thought you should know. I also thought you should know that she asked specifically that I tell you. She said you'd understand the significance of the name. The school will need funding, of course, but Elizabeth has made it clear she doesn't want your money. She wants to build this herself, her way, without obligations to anyone. I respect that. But I also know that you'll try to help anyway. So I'm telling you now, don't. Let her have this. Let her build something that's entirely hers. She's stronger than you ever gave her credit for. Let her prove it. Catherine Wells Alaric read the letter twice, then sat back in his chair. Rowan House. The same name as the school in Ashford. The same name as her family. She'd seen what he'd built, and instead of resenting it, she'd been inspired by it. He wanted desperately to help. To fund her school. To make it easier, to give her everything she needed. But the headmistress was right. This needed to be hers. Entirely, completely hers. So he did nothing. Just filed the letter away and went back to work on his own projects. But 6 months later, when Rowan House School sent out its first fundraising appeal, Alaric made a small, anonymous donation. Not enough to be noticed. Not enough to matter, really. Just enough to feel like he was supporting her from a distance, the way he should have done from the beginning. The years continued to pass. 4 became 5. 5 became 7. Alaric settled into a rhythm of work and community that felt almost like peace. The Elizabeth Foundation grew into one of the largest charitable organizations in the region. The Rowan School in Ashford added a second building. The village prospered, and Alaric himself became known not as the Duke of Blackridge, but simply as Alaric, a man who showed up, did the work, and never asked for more than he'd earned. He was 53 when he received the final letter. It arrived in winter, hand-delivered by Robert Marsh. But this time, Robert didn't just hand it over and leave. He sat down across from Alaric in the study and waited while Alaric opened it. Alaric, 7 years is a long time. Long enough that I've stopped being angry. Long enough that I've built a life I'm proud of. Long enough that I can look back at what we were and see it clearly. I've heard about the Eliza Bridge, about the way you nearly drowned finding a safe ford, about the schools and the foundation, and the way you've spent the last 7 years becoming someone I might have actually liked. I've also heard from Robert, who can't keep his mouth shut, that you still carry the letter I sent you, that you never responded because I asked you not to, that you've honored every boundary I set even when it cost you. I don't know what to do with that information. Part of me wishes you'd been this person when we were married. Part of me knows that if you had been, you wouldn't have learned the lessons that made you who you are now. I'm not writing to reconcile. I'm not writing to offer second chances. I'm writing because 7 years of silence feels like enough, and because I think we both deserve closure that's more than just absence. I'm coming to Ashford next month. Not to see you. I'm visiting the Rowan School at their invitation. But I'll be there. And if you want to talk, as two people who used to know each other, I'm willing. No expectations, no obligations. Just two people acknowledging that we survived something terrible and came out the other side as better versions of ourselves. If you don't want to see me, I understand. I'll visit the school and leave without bothering you. But if you do, I'll be at the inn on the 15th, evening. Elizabeth Alaric looked up at Robert. She's serious. Completely. Scared out of her mind, but serious. Why now? Robert leaned back. Because she spent 7 years building her own life, proving to herself that she didn't need you. And now that she knows she doesn't need you, she's finally free to actually see you clearly. Not as the husband who destroyed her, just as a person who exists in the world. What does she want? What did I just say? Nothing. She wants nothing. Just to sit across a table from you and see if there's anything worth salvaging from the wreckage. Even if it's just, I don't know, mutual respect, acknowledgement that you both grew. Alaric stood, pacing to the window. Outside, snow was falling on Blackridge, covering everything in white. A blank slate. A fresh start. Tell her I'll be there. The 15th of the month arrived too fast and too slow simultaneously. Alaric changed clothes 3 times before settling on simple, practical attire, the kind of thing he wore to council meetings, not the formal dress he'd have chosen years ago. He arrived at the inn exactly on time and found Eliza already there, sitting at a table near the fire. She looked up when he entered, and for a moment neither of them moved. 7 years had changed her. She was older, lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, but she was also more present somehow, more solid. Like she'd grown into herself in a way that made her previous existence seem translucent by comparison. Alaric. Elizabeth. He used her chosen name deliberately. You look well. So do you. Older, but well. He sat down across from her, and Martha brought tea without being asked, gave them both a meaningful look, and disappeared. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then Eliza smiled slightly. This is awkward. Profoundly. Good. I was worried it was just me. She took a sip of tea. I saw the school today, the Rowan School. It's beautiful. The village built it. I just paid for it. You also nearly drowned finding a ford to keep them connected to the world. That's not just paying for things. You heard about that? I hear about everything you do. Robert makes sure of it. She paused. I also heard about the foundation, the work you're doing. It's good work, Alaric. It's penance. No, it's good work. Penance is selfish. This helps people. There's a difference. They fell silent again. Outside, snow continued to fall. Finally, Alaric spoke. Why did you come back? Because I needed to see if you were real. If the man I'd heard about actually existed, or if it was just stories people told. She met his eyes. You're real. That's harder than I expected. Harder how? Because it would be easier if you were still the man who threw me out. I could hate that man. I did hate that man. But this version of you, the one who shows up for harvest festivals and builds schools and risks his life for strangers, I don't know what to do with him. Alaric set down his teacup carefully. You don't have to do anything with him. I'm not asking for anything, Eliza. Elizabeth, I'm just glad you're here. Glad you're thriving. That's all I need. Is it, though? Is that really all you need? He considered lying, considered giving her the answer that would make this easier, but he'd spent 7 years learning to be honest, even when it hurt. No, he admitted. I'd like more. I'd like to know you again, to hear about your school, your students, your life. I'd like to not be a ghost in your past, but I also know I don't get to ask for that. So yes, knowing you're well, that's enough. It has to be. Eliza looked at him for a long time. What if it didn't have to be? His heart stuttered. What? I'm not saying we go back to what we were. That's impossible. The people we were don't exist anymore. But what if we could be something new? Not husband and wife, maybe not even friends, but people who know each other, who care what happens to each other, who can sit across a table and drink tea without 7 years of silence between us. I'd like that, Alaric said quietly. More than I can say. Then that's where we start. Letters, maybe. Updates on our respective schools, stories about the work we're doing. Nothing heavy, nothing that requires forgiving or forgetting, just connection. The kind we never had when we were married. I can do that. Good. She finished her tea. I'm staying through the week, spending time at the school, meeting with the teachers. If you want to have dinner one evening, just dinner, as two people comparing notes on charitable work, I'd be open to that. I'd like that very much. They had dinner 3 times that week. Each meal was easier than the last. They talked about their schools, their students, the challenges of running charitable organizations. They didn't talk about the past, didn't dissect what had gone wrong, just existed in the present. 2 people who'd survived the same disaster and come out the other side changed. On her last night in Ashford, they walked along the bridge, the Eliza Bridge, as snow fell around them. They named it after me, she said softly. It seemed fitting. You're the reason any of this exists. No, you're the reason. I just happened to be the catalyst. You were more than that. You were the only real thing in my life, and I was too terrified to see it. He stopped walking, turned to face her. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I need you to know. I see it now. What you were. What you tried to give me. And I'm sorry I was too broken to accept it. Eliza's eyes were wet. I forgave you years ago, Alaric. I had to, for my own peace. But forgiving you and letting you back into my life, those are different things. I know. But maybe... She hesitated. Maybe there's space for something in between. Not marriage, not romance, just 2 people who care about each other and want good things for each other. I'll take whatever you're willing to give. Then let's start there. Letters, occasional visits, 2 people building good things in the world and sharing the journey. She smiled slightly. Who knows? Maybe in another 7 years we'll actually be friends. I'd like that. They stood on the bridge in the falling snow, 2 people who'd once destroyed each other and somehow found a way to rebuild something better from the wreckage. Eliza left the next morning. But 3 weeks later, Alaric received a letter describing her journey home, the state of Rowan House School, and an amusing story about a student who'd tried to teach mathematics to the chickens. He wrote back with updates on the Ashford School expansion, the Foundation's latest initiatives, and the fact that the village council had voted to make him an official member. The letters continued, monthly at first, then weekly. They shared victories and frustrations, asked each other for advice, celebrated each other's successes. It wasn't marriage, it wasn't even friendship, not at first, but it was connection. Real, honest connection built on mutual respect instead of duty. And slowly, over years, it became something Alaric had never expected. A second chance, not at romance, not at marriage, but at knowing someone fully, and being known in return. He was 61 when Eliza came to Blackridge for the first time in 15 years. She'd been invited to speak at the Rowan School's anniversary celebration, and afterward, she'd asked if she could see the house. Alaric gave her a tour showing her the changes. The sitting room converted to foundation offices, the gardens redesigned, the warmth that now filled rooms that had once been tombs. "It's different," she said, standing in the main hall. "It feels alive." "It took a long time to get here, but yes, it's alive now." She turned to look at him. "You did this, made a house into a home." "I learned from the best. You did it once. I just finally figured out how to follow your example." They stood in the hall where he'd once banished her, and the irony wasn't lost on either of them. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Not marrying me, but the way we were? The 3 years we wasted?" "Every day. But I'm also grateful." "Grateful?" "Because losing you taught me what mattered. And even though I'll never get back what I threw away, I became someone better because of it. That's not worth the cost. Nothing could be worth what I did to you, but it's something." Eliza reached out and took his hand. Just that. Just a hand in his, warm and real. "I'm glad we found our way back to something," she said, "even if it's not what we were supposed to be." "It's better," Alaric said, "because it's honest. We choose this. Every letter, every visit, every conversation, we choose it. That's more than duty. That's real." She squeezed his hand once, then let go. "I should get going. Long ride back to Seabrook." "Come back soon?" "I will. Maybe for Christmas. Rowan House is closed for the holiday, and I'd like to see the village festival." "They'd love to have you. You're something of a legend here." "Strange, since I barely lived here." "You lived here long enough to change everything. That's more than most people manage in a lifetime." She smiled, and for just a moment, Alaric saw a flash of the young woman she'd been, scared and alone and trying so hard to make something beautiful out of a terrible situation. "Take care of yourself, Alaric." "You too, Elizabeth." She left, and Blackridge was quieter for her absence. But not empty. Never empty anymore. Alaric lived another 12 years, long enough to see the Elizabeth Foundation expand to 15 counties, long enough to watch the Rowan School produce its first university professor, long enough to become known throughout the region not as a duke, but as a man who'd changed late in life and spent his remaining years making that change count. He and Eliza exchanged letters every week until his hands grew too shaky to write clearly. Even then, he dictated them to Mrs. Garrett, keeping their connection alive until the very end. On his final day, lying in bed with pneumonia claiming his lungs, he asked Mrs. Garrett to read him Eliza's most recent letter. It was full of news about Rowan House, about students who'd graduated and gone on to change the world, about a life well lived and purposeful. "She's happy," he whispered. "She is, and she knows you are too, or were, or whatever past tense we're supposed to use now." He smiled weakly. Tell her I was grateful. For the second chance, for the letters, for proving that even the worst mistakes don't have to be the end of the story. Tell her yourself. She's coming. Should be here tomorrow." But tomorrow was too late. Alaric died that night, surrounded by villagers who'd come to pay their respects, people whose lives he'd changed, people who'd watched him transform from tyrant to human and decided that redemption was possible after all. Eliza arrived the next morning and stood in the room where he'd died, looking at the peaceful expression on his face. Mrs. Garrett handed her an envelope. "He wanted you to have this. Wrote it 5 years ago, kept it sealed until the end." Eliza opened it with trembling hands. "Elizabeth, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I'm glad you're the one reading it because you're the only person who'll understand what I need to say. I loved you. I know I had no right to. Know that I forfeited that right the night I threw you into the storm. But I need you to know that every good thing I did after that night, every school, every bridge, every woman helped by the foundation, I did it because loving you taught me what actually mattered. I don't expect you to love me back. Don't want you to feel obligated to grieve more than is natural for an old friend who wrote you letters and occasionally made you laugh. But I do want you to know that the 15 years we spent rebuilding something from the wreckage, those were the best years of my life. Not the 3 we were married, those were a waste. But the 15 after? Those mattered. Those were real. I've left instructions with my lawyers. Everything goes to the foundation and the schools. Blackridge Hall itself will become a training center for teachers, a place where people learn to do what you did, reach children who need reaching. There's nothing for you in my will because you don't need anything from me. You never did. But know that every good thing my fortune creates is built on the foundation of what you taught me. That strength isn't control. It's connection. It's showing up. It's choosing kindness even when you've been hurt. Thank you for the letters, for the visits, for proving that even the worst men can change if they're willing to do the work. I'll love you until I stop existing. And maybe even after that. Alaric Eliza read the letter twice, tears streaming down her face. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket, right over her heart. He was a good man, Mrs. Garrett said quietly. He became one, Eliza corrected. That's different, but maybe more important. The funeral was held in Ashford, and half the county showed up. Not for Duke Alaric Vane, but for Alaric, the man who'd built bridges and schools, who'd worked in gardens and sat on councils, who'd proven that change was possible even when it seemed impossibly late. Eliza spoke at the service, talked about second chances and the courage it takes to admit you were wrong, talked about the letters they'd exchanged, the friendship they'd built from the ruins of a terrible marriage. He wasn't a perfect man, she concluded. He made mistakes that cost people, cost me dearly. But he spent the rest of his life making those mistakes matter, building something good from something terrible. That's not redemption, but it's something, and in the end, something was enough. After the service, Martha approached Eliza. He left something for you, not in the will, separate, said to give it to you after the funeral. It was a key. The key to Eliza's old sitting room at Blackridge, now converted into foundation offices. Eliza used it to unlock the door and found the room exactly as she'd left it 15 years ago. Her embroidery, her books, her curtains. Everything preserved. And on the table, a note in Alaric's handwriting. I kept it exactly as you left it, not as a shrine, just as a reminder that beautiful things existed here once, even if I was too blind to see them. You built something good in this house. I hope I did the same. Eliza stood in that room for a long time, surrounded by ghosts of who they'd been and who they'd become. Then she locked the door, pocketed the key, and walked out of Blackridge Hall for the last time. She had her own work to do, her own students to teach, her own legacy to build. But now, when she thought of Alaric Vane, she didn't think of the man who'd destroyed her. She thought of the man who'd spent 15 years learning to build instead. And in the end, that made all the difference. Years later, when Eliza was old herself, she would tell her students about him, about the Duke who learned too late what mattered, about the bridges built and schools founded, about the letters exchanged and the friendship forged from failure. Some mistakes you can't take back, she'd tell them, some damage you can't repair. But you can choose what you build from the rubble. And if you build something good enough, strong enough, honest enough, well, that doesn't erase what you did, but it proves you're more than the worst thing you ever did. Did you forgive him? A student once asked. Eliza considered the question carefully. I forgave what he became, and I mourned what we could have been. Both things can be true. The Rowan House School would operate for another 40 years. The Elizabeth Foundation would help thousands of women escape situations like Eliza's had been. And the Eliza Bridge would stand for over a century, a testament to the fact that even the coldest hearts could learn to build warmth if they were willing to pay the price. In the end, Duke Alaric Vane was remembered not for his wealth or his title, but for a simple truth. He'd made a terrible mistake, and he'd spent the rest of his life trying to make it count for something. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough, but it was something, and sometimes something is all you get. The question is whether you're willing to do the work to make that something matter. Alaric was. And in the end, that was the only redemption he ever achieved. It was also, perhaps, the only redemption worth having.